Now you're on.
Hello, everyone. This is Daniel Giamario, and I'm here with Lizzie Moon. I'm here to share with you the monthly full moon blogcast. And this is, I'm here in the Philippines, and Lizzie is at the Moon Ranch in Arizona. And over the past 2 or 3 years, I've actually produced a lot of material on the United States chart. And and in fact, there will be a link as part of this so you can actually see. We have a whole package of information on that. But I thought it would be really good to do an update on that right now as we're ready to go into an eclipse season. And most everyone who's following any version of news source right now is certainly aware of what is going on in the United States, with the election and things like that. Uh, and we are going to have, as part of our equinox seminars, a whole show just on the cast of characters that are involved in the United States election scenario now. But what I want to do here is something you may not get anywhere else. What I'm going to do is take a look at the U.S. chart the way that we do in this paradigm. And so we're going to explore that original chart. And as I was doing some research before this call, it's just remarkable how many cycles are happening to the US chart. So why don't we take a look on that first slide, and then we're going to just take a deep dive into the US chart. What I'm intending to do here, after using this paradigm, after we're looking at the US chart from that perspective, I'm going to call out what I'm referring to as the 3 shadow zones of the chart. And then we'll basically see how the transits and the progressions are working on the US chart right now. So you can see here, we'll look at the current transits, the initiatory cycles, and in particular, the 3 shadow zones. We'll come back to that after taking a look at the chart and examining it from the perspective of this type of astrology. So let's take a look at that US chart. And Lizzie will be dialoguing with me a bit, and then she's helping me. She created these great slides, and we'll just try to call out a lot of stuff here that I think it's important to know. So first of all, there are a lot of different opinions about the United States chart. I have always felt comfortable with this rectified by Dane Rijar version of the chart. It's the July 4th chart. And whether you actually believe that they were all present and signed the Declaration of Independence at that point or not, I'm convinced by some of the research that Rijar and others have done that this was actually esoterically backdated to have it be this chart. And I've noticed over the last few years, as the United States has been in its Pluto return and a lot of other things that I've written about in the past, that this really works. And I think that it's important to work with this chart in order to see what's actually going on in the country now and over the next year. So within this particular paradigm, we always start by looking at the moon position. You can see the moon is at 2712 Aquarius. So that's equivalent to saying that relative to this entity called the United States of America with the Declaration of Independence, its lineage is Aquarius. It's like saying that it comes from a historical and philosophical and spiritual background, which was the Aquarian lineage. And the south node of the moon being in the 3rd house, so the storyline there is the Gemini job in the Aquarius tribe, and that has to do with the rather the proliferation of different philosophies and information and connections to wisdom teachings from the past. with a great curiosity about all those kinds of things, connected in with the high idealism of the Aquarian lineage. Actually, there's an esoteric consideration here, which is that yes, the founding quote unquote fathers were Masonic members of the Masonic order, but it was not the European branch. So actually they distinguished themselves greatly from the Illuminati European branch of it, and were very much connected into what became the ideals of the Enlightenment. And in fact, interestingly, they got some of their ideals from Native American elders. And so that actually went quite a bit into the original formation of the country. So inherent in the lineage is a great deal of learning, interest in many different philosophies, and with an orientation toward idealism and the ideals of the Enlightenment. Very different than, say, what happened with the same ideals of the Enlightenment that ended up being a violent revolution in France, where those ideals were rather subverted. So the original ideals of the founders came from this particular lineage. And then if we look at the storyline for current life purpose, the north node of the moon is in the ninth house, which is the zone of Sagittarius. So we call that the Sagittarius job in the Sagittarius tribe because it is Sagittarius rising. And ideally or idealistically, that is the desire to be in harmony with the truth, to go into new territory, to take things where it has never gone before. And there are certainly many people who have a good opinion of the intentions of the founders, at least philosophically, is they did end up creating a form of government which was not what it has turned into. In other words, they warned against a democracy, and they had a constitutional republic. And that document, the Constitution, has a great deal in it that had never really appeared in the world before. So it was really quite an innovative project that they had in mind. So those are the storylines. And you can see the angles of the chart, which is going to come into play very much when we look at the cycles. The 2 degrees Libra midheaven and the 2 degree IC Aries. Keep that in mind as we continue to look, as we will launch into the cycles that are happening with this chart. But there's a number of other things I want to point out here that will be relevant to our investigation of the shadow zones. So what the first would be, and I've written extensively about this, that the Mars position, which represents the masculine principle of the chart, is in the sign of Gemini. It also has a pretty tight square with Neptune. And what I find really intriguing about that is that not only did the founding fathers warn against a degeneration into a democracy, that they also warned against a two-party system, a duopoly. They just said it cannot become that, otherwise the United States is in trouble. And yet, if you look at this, it's almost like the United States with Mars and Gemini couldn't get out of it, plus the inherent confusion around that. And there's if anyone who's looked at the history of the United States can see that the different parties have gone back and forth. I mean, after all, Lincoln, who was certainly an arch federalist, was of the Republican Party. And actually what the Democratic Party stood for in the late 60s, early 70s is not what it stands for now. And so I'm just calling out this feature of the confusion around Mars and Gemini. And you put that together with the fact that the lineage was the Gemini job, but that doesn't mean duopoly. That means a tremendous interest in all forms of philosophical and spiritual knowledge. But the Mars in Gemini, which has been on the front lines for the last few years in that square with Neptune, because the U.S. had been fairly recently, and still with some of the transits that are happening, it's a major activation of that Neptune square Mars, including the Neptune opposition that the United States had been in when Neptune was at around 22 Pisces. That's over the last few years, as you can actually see a lot of the things happening in the United States with the political parties involved with being under the influence of that Neptune opposition squaring Mars. Another thing that I want to point out is that clumping of planets in the house of Scorpio in Cancer. Now, when we use one of the primary features of our paradigm, which is planets in the underworld, that is to say, planets on the other side of the sun and off the world stage, then you can see here that Venus is within 10 degrees of the sun, and Jupiter is within 8 degrees of the sun. So, like Jupiter was on the other side of the sun, Venus was on the other side of the sun, and while it's the sign Cancer, what we have represented here is Cancer in the underworld, which I believe also does refer to one of the. It's hard to ignore, particularly if you are outside of the United States and look and see what happens in the United States on a popular level, which is this clannishness or this sense of American exceptionalism, and not recognizing its shadow regarding there, which tends to be a lack of interest in other parts of the world. This is certainly represented by those kind of things. I think there's some great clips out there now on the news about the exact same statements and the same things happening in both conventions, the Republican convention and the Democratic convention, which is the crowds going crazy, USA, USA, or and the same thing, we're number one, that kind of thing, which is representative clearly of the shadow side of Cancer, and not what we in our school love to advocate, is expanding Cancer to the whole planet, a global family, which is not the same as what I'm going to refer to as the shadow of the Aquarius moon. And the shadow of the Aquarius moon is collectivism and technocracy. This goes actually back to the knowledge and what was being presented in the late 60s during the Pluto and Leo generation, where there was a warning that the age of Aquarius, as it were, whatever, that's a whole other topic we can't get into here. But if we are shifting into a so-called age of Aquarius, at that particular time period, there was this speculation about, would it in fact become collectivist technocracy, or would it end up becoming what was called metristic humanism? And in order to have that, then you have to have the honoring the individual, the sovereignty of the individual, and virtually every philosophical foundation of our school and this paradigm is from spiritual teachers and approaches that emphasize that you cannot even have a healthy culture without the sovereignty of an individual. That evolution happens through the individual, not through the collective. Otherwise, it ends up becoming mob rule. It becomes the egregore. It becomes the tyranny of the majority. And while certainly propaganda existed, at the time of the founding fathers, they never had the technology in order to impose it on people, so people were limited in their access to information, where things are censored and so on. I mean, there's been that tendency in humans for a long time, particularly when it's a ruling class. But the necessity to not fall into the trap of the collective or the egregore or the mob rule or the universal. It's like Rajar talked about the coming planetarization of consciousness, but that was on the foundation of the individual, not some sort of hive mind, which is, of course, the goal of Silicon Valley and the transhumanists and those that do want to create some sort of Borg-like hive mind that is showing you how to think rather than being able to come up with your own internal life and being able to connect into with your sovereign self and your connection to your soul and spirit, which materialistic science wants to write out. Obviously, there's some wonderful exceptions to that, but as far as the mainstream view, and particularly the transhumanist dream of Silicon Valley. So I'm pointing out here the these important areas of the U.S. chart that you can't just go by. Oh yeah, U.S. is a nice cancer country, or that oh, Sag rising, we're into the truth, no, the subversion of the original ideals, and then the shadow of Cancer, and then also the confusion and the result of the bifurcation and duopoly that happens, that's represented by the Mars in Gemini position. The transit cycles that many other schools and many other astrologers point out, which is the Pluto return, and you can see there the 27-degree Capricorn Pluto. There's speculation among astrologers, including myself, about, like, for a country, how long does that particular initiatory cycle operate? I mean, now, Pluto is back to the last degrees of the 29th degree. But like in an individual, we allocate about a year and 4/5 for any given Pluto initiation cycle. But there's good reason to think that it's longer than that. In fact, even just on a basic 248-year understanding, actually July 4th of this year was the 248th. So whether you use the exact degrees of Pluto or not, we're certainly still in the zone, even though the United States is still in the Pluto return time. Meanwhile, the other thing that has been tremendously brought up by many other people, including in our school, is the Chiron return, and that is still ongoing. In fact, the most exact part of it is still in front of the early next year, when the perfected portion of that happens, where that'll be the 5th Chiron return for the U.S. Now, we're not going to extend this analysis all the way to 2027, when the United States will be in its Uranus return. But there's certainly activation of that happening already. There's a foreshadowing of that based upon the cycles that are happening to the U.S. chart now. We will return to this, to look at this chart on a number of occasions, and those who have the slides that have the resource for this vlogcast, I'm suggesting you often look at this chart, and with reference now to the cycles and the transits and other things that are going on now in this eclipse season in 2024, and looking ahead to 2025. Do you have any thoughts on what I brought forth here so far, Lizzie?
Oh, well, I just couldn't help be hearing the word subversion as you were talking, because yeah, all these ideals sound great, Sagittarius, even the way our school defines Gemini, right? Rising above that duality sounds great. Cancer sounds great. Oh yes, all of our humanitarian efforts around the world, but I can't help but notice each and every one of those. And that's the word, right? Subversion.
And one thing in last week, and it was actually I believe in the newsletter, I had created a list of resources of where I get my information, and I made the point that virtually every one of those sources are ways of gaining intel that are not partisan, that are not bought into one side or the other. That information is all out there, but you have to kind of look for it, because you're not going to hear any of it if you go to partisan sites, or if you listen to MSNBC all the time, or if you just look at the right-wing sites all the time, you're going to get a skewed view that just adds more and more confusion. I've actually felt that the so-called powers that shouldn't be have taken advantage of the Neptune square and the Neptune opposition time frame in order to sow confusion and discord. And the only way I can basically see through it is similar to what you just said, which is to be able to perceive Gemini more like the Gemini job in the Aquarius tribe, which is a willingness to look at all sources of knowledge and information, to expand the awareness to a larger view, rather than buying into the lower octave of Gemini. I mean, that I did a whole exploration on this in a previous Ramblings article about the origin of the constellation of Gemini, and it's really giving a different insight than what we normally think about the way the Hellenistic culture defined the sign of Gemini. But that's beyond the scope of our conversation now. But you can look at the references and the resources that we'll include for this. So let's go through.
Real quick, I'll just add that I think if we take the step, or take the courage to step away from the partisanship of everything, then we get to see exactly what you said. They're kind of saying the same thing. They're just giving me the package that appealed to me, regardless, whichever color I wanted to wear. And so
I'm thinking of one of the possible ways. I don't know whether it would ever be allowed to happen in the United States. One way to get beyond the confusion of the duopoly is that when a person is voting, that they have a choice when they vote, either to abstain, and that's, so they're saying, I am voting and I'm abstaining, or that they have the choice of none of the above, either one. And quite frankly, if that was a choice, you'd have more people voting, and then you would actually not ever have one of the two party candidates ever get 270 electoral votes, and so that would be a way of going beyond the duopoly if you had that choice.
Well, I'll have to throw in my little meme here that says, I can't believe it. I voted for the lesser of two evils and I still got evil.
Exactly.
So,
right. But so it's a hard choice. I mean, I advocate people voting in their local elections, but when you basically vote for one of the two parties, you're giving your consent to the duopoly, quite frankly. So right. That's the problem. So let's look and see the cycles that are happening to the U.S. chart.
Okay. Are you seeing this?
So there's so much here. So currently, and we're going through the ones that are more applicable. No, wait a second. Now, this should be. So, oh yeah. No, this is right. No, let's start with number one. Let's go back to number one. Sorry. Jupiter conjoining Mars square Neptune. And this is from September 24th to November 2nd. So the time period that begins right around the time period of the equinox. The eclipse window is going to have some of this. So in our paradigm, where Jupiter is an amplifier. Jupiter, wherever it's located, it's amplifying, expanding, activating where it is. So this is Jupiter actually moving through Gemini. In fact, what's really remarkable is that the stationary retrograde point where Jupiter is going to be around 21 degrees something for many days, is exactly really is right at that point. It's, you know, right on Mars opposing Neptune. You can see Mars at 2122, and Jupiter goes stationary direct at the 21st degree, and that certainly will amplify or activate the Neptune-Mars square. So that's really a present thing over these next weeks. And go back to that first point. And this actually continues then in April and May of 2025, when Jupiter will again be at around 2021, 22 degrees of Gemini, again activating and amplifying that square that we've mentioned about already. Also from July 18th, 2024 until March 8th, 2025, Jupiter is conjuncting the descendant of the US chart, the descendant of the US chart being around 13 Gemini. You know, and so therefore we have the amplification of the ascendant descendant axis. And also during this transit of Jupiter through Gemini, it's also been going back and forth over Uranus. You know, so that portion of the chart is very much amplified. But I think the most important factor on this is the amplification of that square with Neptune. Then now, one of the other shadow areas that I was referring to was the shadow of the US Aquarius moon. So it turns out from July 12th, 2024 until February of 2026, and I'm using the orb here the way that it would be used on an individual's chart. So we have the Uranian square to the US moon. So certainly that would be unexpected, unpredictable, unknowable events of extreme novelty that are designed to break apart whatever obstructions and limitations there are to the Aquarius moon in unexpected ways. Now, one could read into that a certain amount of positivity, which is that it could awaken the Aquarius moon to the fact that it's fallen into the hive collectivist technocratic shadow of Aquarius. And I've in the past done a great deal of work on the issue of the shadow of Aquarius. And so I think this is a hugely important thing when we're looking at the natal chart of the United States, the Uranian square. I mean, in the mentoring groups that I've been doing and the other work I've done with individuals, there's so many that I've worked with recently that have the Uranian square to not just the moon, but you know, to angles of their chart and other essential parts of the chart. But since we've called this out as one of the three primary shadow areas, the areas of stress on the US chart, we cannot leave out this Uranian square to the moon. And actually on the US chart, the moon is, the US natal moon is about a degree from Pallas. And, you know, the symbol Pallas does represent the expression of the sacred feminine that's more of a strategist. You know, like it is said that Pallas Athena was the one who was whispering into the ear of the politicians or the generals, you know, saying, "Do it this way, and you'll win your battle, or you'll win your debate in the Senate, and so on." So that's to me a kind of a maverick factor in there. Like, let's hope that this Pallas Athena effect is going to actually awaken the shadow of the Aquarius moon to where it's been lost. And then there's the aforementioned Pluto return. And again, I mentioned about how there's controversy about like how long that is. In our rendition of it, it's for sure started April 27th, 2021. If you only use the orb that we use for individuals, it comes to the end, November 20th, 2024, when I gave that date in there because that's when Pluto goes into Aquarius. However, I do think there's another reason why we might suspect that it's longer, other than what I brought up before about the fact that this 2024 July 4th was the 248 point. So if you looked at that from a different angle, then it would be another year, a year and a half at least. But that the other factor, and I forget what number it is on the list. It's about the progressed Pluto position. Let's go to that right now, actually.
That is,
Yeah.
no,
Before we, yeah. So before,
hold on. There we go. Pluto right here. We have 14 points here, so yeah, it's the 13th.
Yeah, I don't normally when I'm doing an individual's chart, I don't generally look at the progressed positions of the outer planets because they're moving so slowly. But I could not help but notice in looking at where the progressed Pluto is relative to the July 4th, 1776 chart, it's currently at 2932 Capricorn. And of course, even without looking at the U.S. chart, this is the time frame now when Pluto is making its last little dip back into Capricorn, and very close to this degree. I mean, today as we speak, Pluto is at 2949. But so I thought I was called upon to then imagine, well, because sometimes, and a lot of people in our school, we use the Sabian symbols and the Lonsdale symbols for these degrees. And I think it's instructive to take a look at what Rajar says is this degree. A secret meeting of men responsible for executive decisions in world affairs. The power to assume responsibility for crucial choices arrived at after mature discussions with those who share this power. Now, this, of course, is an idealistic presentation onto it, but I need to point out here that during the eclipse season and during this time period when Pluto has the progressed Pluto and then Pluto having dipped back into this degree, is when the United Nations just happens to be meeting around the time of the autumnal equinox, and they're planning out, UN 2.0. They're following the dictates of the World Health Organization, and there are those who believe that they're about to declare a planetary emergency, and so then what are they going to do with that power? So it's like, yes, let us hope there's a secret meeting of those responsible for executive decisions in world affairs, but let's hope it's the ones that are not like these self-appointed elites that nobody put in that position. And so some speak of the occult hierarchy, but then it's the White Lodge, so it can be both sides of that. Decisions of a supreme council of quasi-divine beings. So you can get a sense of that here, that about what's that. I think it's just absolutely remarkable that happens to be the Sabian symbol relative to everything we've been talking about the last few years about this dip back and forth between the sign of Aquarius and Capricorn. And this is sort of like the outcome of what a Capricorn might have been learning from Aquarius, and hopefully not the shadow of Aquarius, So there's a lot you can read into this. And let's just see what Lonsdale has to say about it.
Heightened ability to bring this greater self into action. The towering presence of the one who knows, informing each moment.
A huge and formidable destiny, dedication to bring all of yourself through into this world. A steadfast, adamant quality of soul. The prenatal resolve to work out all remaining karmas and be free. Intensive focus upon soul evolution, purpose, will. You have something to grow into throughout your life. Ancient ways, unfallen heights, seeing through, staggered by what you have taken on, ripening on the vine under massive pressure from within. The path and journey of ascension, with the body honored and the world renewed. Awakening and tapping the source for endeavors, projects, tasks require top-level clearance and the truest endowment of inward faculties to see through and light up the world. So both very powerful symbols to understand, I think, even just what's happening right now with this portion of the Pluto return. So
well,
let's
and
keep going. Yes, go ahead.
to also in the first lines here, it says now the work of the secret committees in the White House and the White Lodge and, all the esoteric philosophy. I mean, they're using it. And so I kind of feel like instead of just going, oh my God, they're doing this to us.
Right.
Well, I mean, we have access to, again, the same creative power to create this, right? The soul evolution. And it requires knowing the self, which is exactly what, this paradigm helps us do, those higher endeavors of the Aquarian essence,
Indeed.
So you can't make this up.
No,
It's all here for us. It's the strategy for us. So,
So let's go back to our list there.
Okay, we went through here, so let's go to number 5. We've been talking about the Chiron return. Those are the next slides I have too. So
yeah, the key part of this is early next year when Chiron is at 2008. It nearly touched into it, back at the time period of the solar eclipse. So this is ongoing. It's the 5th Chiron return for the United States. And some of the researchers in our school have gone into this, and some other astrologers that I know that specialize in Chiron. And you can look back at the other Chiron returns. And in our paradigm, the purpose of Chiron is to point out where the fracture points or the wounding is. And as was pointed out by some of those that have worked on this, that the previous Chiron returns would not indicate that the United States actually did get the teaching, and they didn't actually take responsibility for where the fracture point or the wounding is. And I've called out what here in this conversation where at least where 3 of the wounds are,
Well, I'll just add in, I think, isn't this the 5th one? And I think in numerology, isn't the 5th the time for change or something? It really shakes it up. So maybe
it's also like the completion of the pentacle or the star.
I was
and
gonna. I'm sorry. I thought I changed this over to the 21st degree here,
that
but
was
I
the
didn't.
other
So
slide. Yeah, that's the wrong one there. Let's just pass over that for the time period.
Yeah,
So
I'll include it. I'll include the right ones in the resources. So yeah.
Now I also, as part of a project that I haven't dived into completely, but I started looking at this, which I'm using that July 4th chart that we're using. I did notice something really interesting that in March, actually, and I actually did the more exact chart on this before we started today. It's around March 23rd, 2024, which was the exact progressed new moon. And it's the 9th one of them. And I've also given the dates here of the other progressed new moons. You can see the dates there, 1787, 1816, 1846. Interestingly, 1935 is just a loaded time period, 1965, 1994. I'm offering up those dates because it's beyond the scope of this presentation to go into, what are the main events during those years. But our view of a progressed new moon, it's a reset point. And so there's a time period right before the progressed new moon, which is like the old moon, which is a dark point. And then about like if we base this on a month, then the day and a half after the new moon is when the little crescent moon comes up. So I do find it interesting that as the new moon phase starts to unfold, as we get up to 2026, 2027, that's the Uranian return for the U.S. So this is a reset point, actually. But how are we going to reset it? I mean, it's actually, to me, it's just mind blowing that the progressed new moon corresponds to the time frame of the end of Kali Yuga, but also the fourth turning, which I've written about before. That it's a turnover time based on a lot of other paradigms. So that's and what's worth looking at, and we've included it as part of this presentation, the Sabian symbol and the Lonsdale symbol for the degree of the progressed new moon, which is 20 Pisces. Did you have that on here?
It's in the other, I can share it or I can read it. I have it right here. I will include it in the right, but I have it here or I can share it on the screen either way.
Yeah, why don't let's come back to that at the very end.
Okay, will do. Yeah.
So also, if we're talking about the angles of the United States chart, from March 17th, 2024 until November 15th, in other words, also including this eclipse season, Saturn, transiting Saturn, squaring the ascendant descendant. And if you think about that one for a moment, one of the more important features of 2024 into 2025 is the square between Saturn and Jupiter. And so that square between Saturn and Jupiter is clearly activating the angles of the US chart. We talked about Jupiter on the descendant, but this is Saturn squaring the ascendant descendant. And that's a fairly long time frame where that's the case. Meanwhile, now back to Mars. We talked about how Jupiter was amplifying Mars in Gemini. Well, look at this. From June 29th, 2024 to March 6th, 2025, transiting Saturn is squaring the US Mars. I mean, I don't know. I mean, not only the angles of the US chart, but the relationship of Saturn and Jupiter to each other are very strongly connected to this amplification of the Mars square Neptune phenomena. Actually, where Saturn is will be opposite Neptune, but what's important about that is that it's the square to Mars. And then we get to this ninth one, and 9 and 10, which are related here. And this has to do with the transit of the nodes. So actually, right now, as we speak, the North Node is at 641 Aries. But it is soon going to be conjuncting the IC. It's going to be on the angles there, the IC-MC angle, where the North Node will be on the IC, the South Node will be on the midheaven, and at 2 degrees, 2 degrees Libra Aries. And that, look at the time frame there, August 26, 2024 through February 26, 2025. North Node on the IC, and South Node on the midheaven. Now, you can actually read into that a certain degree of hopefulness, because the North Node is a future-oriented kind of thing, and anytime you have a nodal axis joining together with the angles of a country or the angles of an individual chart, we're getting a transmission. It's like from the future self, beaming in and saying, this is what you need to be aware of. The transmissions can be received accurately. But then number 10.
Skip over this. Here you
go. Is Saturn soon? Now we're going to extend this a little bit into the future. But since we've revealed the activation of the IC-MC, look at this. Starting June 6th, 2025 is Saturn's transit on the IC of the United States. And that'll be a good 9-month process. And as we teach in our school, anytime an outer planet, or we already mentioned the nodes, but it's the same phenomena happens here with Saturn and Neptune, both soon being on the IC of the United States. We've got an activation of the entire axis. So anytime Saturn or any outer planet is on an angle, it's bringing into play the entire axis. So the MC and the IC are both involved here. So we have a long time period here that begins, next spring, summer, of Saturn and Neptune both going into Aries to be on the IC of the U.S., reminding you that the U.S. IC is just around exactly 2 degrees Aries. And then we mentioned progressed Pluto at 29, Capricorn 32. We discussed that. And then the fact that Pluto is now back almost exactly to that point over these next months. And then last but not least, looking ahead as well as what is happening now, transiting Mars in Cancer, moving over the Cancer planets of the U.S. chart. September 8th, 2024 to October 24th, 2024, and then again January 2024 through April 18th, 2025. And if that weren't enough, then why I think it's really important to bring up Mars here, in addition to what we talked about with the amplification of Mars, with Saturn and Saturn and Jupiter involved, is that the next synodic cycle overstory for Mars is in fact Cancer. So the archetypal energy for the masculine in both men and women, starting January 15th for a little over 2 years, is going to be the sign of Cancer. And so basically this talking about what is Cancer, calling out what the shadow of limited version of Cancer, clannish Cancer, exceptionalism, false exceptionalism Cancer, it is going to be expanded. I mean, that's going to be the job of archetypal masculine in 2025 and 2026, which is to revision our understanding of Cancer. And why it's
Daniel, I want to speak to number 12 here because you're speaking about the expansion and going over to look at this, right? The 20th Jupiter return too.
Yes.
In Cancer. So we skipped over that one. So it's just like
right. No, we don't. Thank you for that. Yes, indeed. So, and for what I'm saying regarding the overstory for Mars and Cancer, and even now during the conception point of the archetype for the following couple of years in Cancer now, the Mars cycle really accentuates when it enters into the sign of the next overstory as it gets brighter and closer to the Earth between now and January 15th. And then next year, the 20th Jupiter return for the US. And just to remind you all what I was saying near the beginning, the US natal Jupiter is in the underworld. So it's even from the original chart, it's suggesting that, there might be a problem with Cancer in the US, that particularly if it's the old Cancer, if it's the old version of Cancer, which we're in the process of wanting to evolve and, take to a more global level. So good grief, you can imagine how this was just blowing my mind when I was actually researching this before our call today.
Yes. So I'm going to stop sharing here. I just want to share this screen that you mentioned about the degree for the progressed new moon. Let me see if I can. Sorry, I'm just learning this platform. We're trying something new, so hopefully I can pull it up. Maybe not. Let me see. Nope, that's not it.
No.
Okay, I can't find it, but continue talking and I will pull it up in just a moment if there's anything else you want.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't have the book on this right next to me. I might be able to try to find this and read it.
Why don't I just read it too? I have it right in front of me. I was just trying to
read it.
So it says this is from from Dane Rajar's Sabian symbols, and this is Pisces 20 for the progressed new moon. It says a table set for an evening meal. The keynote, an indication that in the end and at an appointed time, the individual's needs will be met among those to whom he is linked by a spiritual or biological web of energies. The significant element in this scene is not only the meal, but the fact that it is an evening meal. To use traditional symbolism, after a long chain of personal existences, the soul returns to its spiritual home at the close of the day of manifestation. There it finds that which renews and amply sustains. The happiness of the beyond of existence is experienced if all has gone well. This last symbol of the 70th five-fold sequence promises a satisfying or fulfilling end to whatever one has been undertaking. As the life closes, the soul consciousness finds nourishment in the harvest of whatever during the whole life has been relevant to the archetypal purpose and destiny of the soul, one of the myriad of aspects of the divine creative word which began this cycle.
And then, which actually, in any time you see these symbols that have to do with the end of a cycle, you know, the evening, the end of a whole process, it just fits into the larger framework that we've been teaching for a good number of years, which is the convergence of so many different timelines, and then plus, you know, the end and the beginning of a processional cycle, the end of Kali Yuga, March next year, and then also. The fourth turning, you know, which corresponds to very important points in the United States story. The Civil War right before World War II, and now there's another fourth turning happening now. These symbols seem to marvelously amplify, really, the same issues here. You know, a lot of amplification. Jupiter, the Jupiter-Saturn alignment, the progressed new moon, the Chiron return, the Pluto return, uh, um, and then all three areas of what I'm indicating maybe the shadow of the US chart, all being called out at this point. The underworld cancer, the expansion and amplification of what is cancer really, the shadow of Aquarius, the collectivist trance, the technocratic control by a small group of elites, um, and then also clearly the bifurcation and duopoly that is represented by the confusion around Mars and Gemini. So, I mean, our focus here in the school is as much as possible is to allow people to see a bigger view and not to get caught up in the deception and the confusion. And as much as possible, we offer tools for that. I mean, if you're not interested in like keeping track of all the stuff that I keep track of, and so do you, then clearly all you have to do is connect into as quickly as possible, be in alignment with your life purpose themes. Because if you know that, if you're in harmony with your life purpose theme, it really doesn't matter what happens, and you will know exactly what place, what part to play, what place on the wheel of life you would be here to participate in and to engage with, you know, regardless of what the outcome of all of this might be. Our view from a celestial perspective is that all is well and the universe is unfolding as it should. And even if Steiner is correct, you know, Steiner back in the early 20s, 1920s, said the world may need to die in order for it to be resurrected. And my goodness, if you have a Chiron return and a Pluto return happening at the same time, what needs to be composted will be composted. And there's plenty of natural cycles as well as whatever part humans have had to play in all of this. It's happened before, it'll happen again. You know, that last symbol I found quite in the Lonsdale one for the progressed new moon. The black
Yeah.
cube is
Yes.
is hugely shows up in a lot of esoteric literature. You know, it's a
Yeah.
symbol for Saturn, actually, the black cube. But yeah, you might want to just read that, see what it has to say.
Yes. Pisces 20. This is from Elias Lonsdale in Inside Degrees. Says a perfect black cube sits alone in the desert. Isolation, uniqueness that becomes separative and self-referential, exquisitely designed to be only a certain way and not any other way, preserved against rust or corrosion, maintaining standards, priorities, what seems to be the given. Yet something is wrong. It is true that all lies within, and that turning yourself into what you are not is ultimately absurd. But you are not listening, not paying attention to the subtle cues. You are so intent upon self consistency that you have tuned out far too much in the process. And this shall call for the lessons and hard experiences to crack you open again, and to give you a chance to discover afresh what can be when nothing is assumed and nobody has set anything up ahead of time.
Yes, there's a lot in there. I mean, because it speaks of the importance of the development of an individual self, but also the aspect of it, that the problem that can happen when you then become isolated. And it even shows how a person can be isolated in the black cube, but by believing in what they're being told rather than a deeper investigation of their true self. So there's a lot in there, and maybe it's a way of um, I, I've kind of done a summary a few times here, about the different shadows. We looked at through all the different cycles that are happening. Every one of them is worthy of a long article, a long investigation. We could have like a whole hour just on each one of them. But I wanted to give an overview about what's at stake here, and I have a feeling that maybe there's other astrologers that are looking at it this way. I haven't seen who they are, to be able to have this way of unpacking the U.S. chart. But as far as I'm concerned, it really matches my objective understanding of what's actually happening in the United States, and the confusion that is out there, the bifurcation and the deception and the divide and conquer kind of thing is happening, which is the utilization of the downside of Gemini, actually. Um, so every one of these points can be gone into greater depth. I thought now, as we go into this eclipse season, it was important to know about this, and particularly as the events unfold leading up to what may or may not happen with an election. And we haven't even discussed all the other stuff going on, but you can read into it if you see these cycles that are on the US chart, and to take seriously what we know about what the purpose of initiation cycles are. The last thing I wanted to say here, and it's to reiterate where we're coming from in the school, that we recognize, despite what modernity and some of the intellectuals of the left are now saying, that individualism is colonialism. Actually, what an incredible deception that is, because every valid and authentic spiritual teacher I'm aware of, it says the evolution begins with the individual, the sovereignty of the self, and without that, Aquarius is only shadow, despite its idealism, and that's ultimately what I think is what's happened in the United States by giving power over to the Silicon Valley cult, which actually runs both parties, And there will be a whole seminar on this by looking at the charts of the major players. That's going to which is going to be the topic of one of our equinox seminars. The other equinox seminar is the one about the evolution of the signs. And we're going to be putting a lot of attention on the evolution of Cancer and Gemini, the ones that are really kind of on the front lines at this point. So any final words before we close this jam-packed blog?
Right? Yeah. Well, I just feel like, there is so much, and again, whether we memorize all the transits and things that are going on, I think a lot of people can just feel it. And, just like some idea that, oh, this makes sense, you know, in a astrological way, a philosophical, whatever.
Mhm.
And then it can also be, I think, when we first start waking up to all these big things and how it really is playing out on the world stage, that it can be overwhelming and maybe even scary. And there's nothing we can really still even do about it. If it's going to be reset or recycled or whatever, there's not much, we can't stop it, you know, the wall from, you know, whatever. So what can we do? And I think it goes back to this idea that the school's based on, as without, so within, which means if that's happening, if it's recycling, resetting in some way, then all we can do is our own individual recycling, resetting, you know, and just allow ourselves to, if we got to go in a black cube for a little while to extract from all of the drama and all the other stuff, then do that. But then, yes, also have the courage to come back out and connect again with, you know, others who are seeking some, you know, deeper meaning behind all of this, instead of just the same old
Right.
shoots that the $1 trillion machine wants to get us into. So that's as much of a nutshell I could put all that into. It's just like it, I think it just really points us more toward what the age of Aquarius is about, if anything, is it can't be about all of that out there. And you
Mhm.
have to continue just turning back to yourself, figure out who you are, your own sovereignty, and then we can all come back out of our black cubes and meet again, you know, and know that we know ourselves,
No.
you know, very well.
What you're just saying reminds me of one other thing that might be a good way to close this. Uh, must have been maybe 30 years ago. I used to receive this journal. This is back in printed media. You know, this is, you know, before any internet or anything like that. And it was called The Leading Edge. And it was written by a man by the name of Val Valerian, who was a triple Aquarian. So no, I'd like to disparage, and I'm often very critical of the shadow of Aquarius. And that's even beyond the issue about, well, what is it the constellation? Is it the sign? What does the Aquarius age really mean? But in looking at the sign of Aquarius, what Val said, he said that the point of all of this, in his journal, had all kinds of what are now called conspiracy theories, but also extremely high-end spiritual practices. And what he said at the beginning of that journal, he said that the intent of this is, if this puts you into fear, this is not for you. Our view is that it's an exercise in awareness. If you expand the awareness, then you can you can integrate all three worlds, including a willingness to look at the fact that what is happening is there's more going on than what's in the mainstream news, and that some of these scenarios that are put in the category of conspiracy theories, whether they're true or not, it's still an exercise in awareness to not throw a person into fear and shutting down. So therefore, I'm saying that here at the end here. I have been accused of various points. Oh, Daniel, you're just too negative. Actually, then you do not know the full scope of what it is we're presenting here, which is all three worlds, the development of spiritual technology techniques to know the self, to be in harmony with life purpose, but also not to close our eyes to actually what's happening in front of us, because the journey is one of embodiment, to bringing spirit into matter. Involution being just as important as evolution. There's a reciprocity to that. So with that, thank you for collaborating with me on this and helping out on this. And we're certainly open and to any feedback on what we've been presenting here. And stay awake. All right.
Yes,
Mhm.
thank you.